And on my desk here is a picture of Albert Yates, who's president of the Colorado State University, here on the right. And on the left is Dan Ritchie, who has been involved with the University of Denver since 1983. He's a Harvard graduate himself, has an MBA, used to run Westinghouse Broadcasting, gave this school what amounts to almost $50 million in support, is the chancellor, works for nothing a year, is standing at a microphone at 6 o'clock in the morning at the Cable Center. Good morning, Chancellor Ritchie.
Good morning, Brian. It's still night, however, here in Denver.
You know, you have a program underway called Bridges to the Future, American History and Values in light of September the 11th. What are you trying to accomplish with this? We have a couple of Englishmen sitting here at our desk. We're going to ask them what American values are. What do you say American values are?
Well, what we're trying to accomplish is to make people think about the values, to understand why they're so important, and to look at how they may have changed since the beginning of the Republic, and whether that's a good thing, and looking forward, what should we be thinking about? What should we be? What should our values be? And that's what we're trying to accomplish. Do you want my views?
Well, I actually wanted to ask you, what is your favorite American value, and why is it an American value and not, say, a German value?
Oh, well, I would hope it would be a value everywhere. My favorite value is really integrity, and personal integrity and trustworthiness, because without that, nothing works. An organization doesn't work. A society doesn't work. History tells us that if it's everybody for him or herself, things don't work very well, and life isn't much fun.
Now, as you know, and you're quite free to say it, that you're in your 70s and you're still involved, active every day, running a university. Why are you working so hard at your age?
Because I'm in love with the place.
Why? What is it you like about it?
Well, it's an opportunity, I think, to serve, but to help young people really become all they can be, but you know, the most difficult part of this, I think, is setting the right example all the time. You know, it's the best way to teach is to set that example, and that's what I'm committed to, and why I would get up this time of day and come and meet with our students.
Well, Chancellor Ritchie, thank you for getting up this early in the morning and coming in and joining us. We're going to turn to our guests here, and then we're going to come back to the students who are there in the room with you this morning. And you folks haven't been here with us for a while. Since we last talked, Christopher Hitchens, you've been in Qatar or in Qatar, depending on how you want to pronounce it.
You mingle the words Qatar and gutter.
Would you like to try
back
it?
Of your throat, gutturally as well. Qatar is where I've been.
What did you find when you were there?
Well, it's if we had a map, you'd see the Saudi coast of the Gulf, and you'd see a sort of peninsula, rather shaped like a palm, sticking out. It's a monarchy, but it's recently had a regime change. In fact, it's the only Arab country in the last 2 decades that has. They overthrew the old king, exiled him, and sued him for $3 billion in missing oil revenues. And then, though it's a Wahhabi Muslim state and society, they abolished censorship, gave women the right to vote, to run for office, and all the rest of it. And then, perhaps best known for this, they invited Al Jazeera, the Arabic satellite TV station, to come to operate from Qatar and broadcast from there without censorship. They had previously been trying to broadcast from Saudi Arabia, but the Saudis wouldn't let them do it. So there are now probably 35 million people who tune into Al Jazeera every day, and it's completely destroyed and undercut the state monopoly of broadcasting in the Middle East.
Andrew Sullivan, as you hear him talk about his trip over there, and we're showing a map of Qatar on the air this morning, and there's a UN vote in just a couple of hours. What do you think this country ought to do?
About what?
About the future of the Iraqi situation.
I think we should continue to do what we have been doing, which is put enormous pressure on this despotic and disgusting regime to actually cough up its weapons of mass destruction and its nerve gas and its botulism and its anthrax and its nuclear weapons and its chemical weapons, or we will go in there and do it for them. And the question, I think, is entirely a function now of Bush's policy for the last 2 years of meaning what he says, as opposed to 8 years of the United States not meaning what it says. And the message is getting through, and I think the election has only intensified the pressure on Saddam, as I think a lot of people who voted meant it to do. So my fear right now is that Hans Blix sets down and muddles around like Mr. Magoo and doesn't get anywhere, and we lose the window of opportunity to actually get rid of this disgusting person and liberate the people of Iraq from the tyranny under which they labor.
We're going to go to the phones and talk to the students in just a moment. Our two guests, Andrew Sullivan and Christopher Hitchens, have done this before. Let's go next to the election. Your take on the just completed election.
Can I just finish on Qatar one thing?
What if I said no?
Then I would have to talk about the election.
No, go ahead.
Meekly. Well, the third great... you should hope you're waving my Vanity Fair piece, which has just come out about my report from this place. The third thing that Qataris have done is they've taken a side in the struggle that Andrew was just talking about. Having democratized themselves, they're interested in not living next to a vast despotic regime, and they've allowed the United States to build a 15,000-foot airbase on their soil without asking particularly what they want it for. And the foreign minister of Qatar has said recently, I don't know for sure this is true, but I've been reliably told it was true, to have flown to Baghdad and said to Saddam Hussein, look, you have one more chance. If you'll surrender, we will let you and your family live in our country. If you'll spare us all, what's otherwise going to happen? But at that moment, the interview was at an end. I think Mr. Hussein is determined to fight it through to the last, but I think people will take him up on it.
Let me remind the audience that AndrewSullivan.com is up and active, and this morning, if you got on it, he tells you that he has no excuse for the way he looks this morning because he's been up late. Let me start with you.
I wasn't up late. I went to bed very early for me, but this is just a rat. It's like I feel like I'm not nowhere near in as bad a shape as these poor people in Colorado who are blinking in the middle of the night talking to us, for which I am immensely grateful. But no, it's hard for me to get up at this time of day.
A statement from both of you on this election.
Well, I mean, it took me by surprise, even though I've been spending the last 2 years telling people not to underestimate George Bush, and there I was underestimating him. This was a huge endorsement, I think, of his conduct of the war. That's what this is about. It's the most pressing issue facing us. And it's also a huge indictment of the Democrats' negativism, bitterness, anger, and inability to present a constructive or positive alternative. They had nothing really to say. They said, on the economy, we don't like your tax cut, but we're not going to reverse it, which is a completely incoherent position. And on the war, they kept saying, we're for the war, but everybody knew they didn't really mean it. And between someone with conviction and people who have no conviction, it's a pretty easy decision for people to make. And this is a lesson we've learned so many times before. And there's the notion Democrats were hoping to win by blaming the wealthy or blaming the rich or blaming Bush or blaming any number of people. This negativism that they engaged in, I think it started with Gore in 2000. It's continued. It's rancid. It doesn't work. They've got to start offering something constructive instead.
Christopher Hitchens, you notice that Andrew Sullivan's been in this country so long he's starting to lose his accent. How about you?
No, I have noticed that, and I've actually been meaning to speak to him about it. He's so slightly overdone the assimilationist posture. Nobody asked my predictions for the election, which I'm sorry about, because if I'd made them, I would have turned out to be right. I hope you're impressed to hear.
We'll accept that.
I thought, no, I could feel it coming, because by the simple experience of asking myself, suppose I was a registered Democrat, which I will admit I'm not, but suppose I was, and I know a lot of people who are, what single thing would get me to the polls? I couldn't think of one. I just couldn't imagine one trying my best to be lenient for them.
What do you think of George Bush?
And so that's a terrible thing to have to say for a political party. The second thing, by the way, I want to say, I noticed this yesterday. The New York Times, during its summary of the Senate race, it gave the percentages, races rather. It gave the percentages, the turnout, and then it also gave the money spent by each candidate. In no case was the Republican the big spender. The Democrats outspent in all the Republicans in each.
The Times also.
And I think that's new, by the way. The Terry McAuliffeization of the Democratic Party.
You didn't answer my question, though. What do you think of George Bush?
What do I think of George Bush? I think he is, I mustn't sound flippant about this, he's a very strong test of a very important proposition, which is that anyone can be president. In other words, he's probably the least qualified guy ever to have run for the office or even been considered for it. Everybody knows that he's not very well educated, not very well traveled, not very cultured, not very smart. But he's actually made a fair job of what ought to be, after all, a civil service position.
But first, let me just...
Anyone ought to be able to do it.
Yale and Harvard are just reeling, having been told that being educated at Yale and Harvard means you're not very well educated. I mean, the truth is he was very well educated.
I don't mean to say he didn't attend good schools, but I mean, so did I, but I'm not well educated. I went to a better university.
I would judge him on the basis of what he's done. It seems to me that the achievement that he should have lost in 2000 by a landslide, given the economic conditions, given the incumbent vice president. He should have lost every debate on those grounds. He won every single one of them. Any historical precedent would have shown him losing...
Al Gore.
Well, I know. Well, Al Gore is supposed to be very well educated, of course, a lot dimmer than Bush turned out to be. No, I think you're still underestimating him, which is fine by him.
He loves the idea
that
we got to get the phones and we got to get the students involved, and they should know that both these men were born in England, if you haven't figured it out by now. Both of them went to Oxford, although Andrew Sullivan also snuck into Harvard for a while. And you've both lived here in the country for how long?
It's nearly 20 years now.
Mr. Hitchens?
It's just 21 years.
You are a citizen, Andrew Sullivan?
I am not.
You are a citizen, Christopher Hitchens?
No, we both think we're cheating the country of its dues, actually.
Lexington, Kentucky, first up. Go ahead, please. What would you like to say?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to tell both these guys I'm huge fans of both of them. Read everything they write. Christopher Hitchens' weblog is killer. Hitchens is a great writer. As a libertarian Republican here in a red state, I'd like to ask both of them a quick question, two quick questions. One is, on economic policy, what are the one or two things they'd like to see Bush do? First, to get the economy going. Secondly, what do they think of one of our local heroes, Mitch McConnell?
Who would like to start? Mr. Sullivan?
I would like to see Bush broaden his tax cuts, not to remove the tax cuts at all. I think they should be made permanent, but I'd like to see them extended further down the income classes than they have been. I don't think it's good for conservatism simply to give tax breaks for the very wealthy. I think we need to give it to all people. We need to bring more people out of taxation altogether. I agree with him on the basic notion that we need to keep taxes low at this point, especially in a troubled economy. But I'd like to see him broaden his base in that way.
The last time there was a Republican midterm sweep, the Gingrich time, they made a promise which I'd really like to see them keep, which is that people who live in the District of Columbia don't have to pay the federal income tax.
Just because you live in the District of Columbia?
Because we're not allowed to vote. Well, I do live in the District of Columbia, but I think I'm still waiting for that promise, that shining city on the hill.
Do you have any opinion of Mitch McConnell, who's going to be the #2 leader for the Republicans in the Senate?
I don't know anything about him except that he was a tremendous foe of the campaign finance reform.
Let's go to Chicago, Illinois.
And that he looks like the sort of guy.
Chicago, and then we'll go out and ask our students to get involved. Chicago, you're on the air. Chicago, are you there? Chicago, Illinois, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Please speak up.
Why you have two imports analyzing American politics?
We do it all the time, but how about getting a comment in here or a question, and we'll go on with the program?
What's the question?
Well, if they noticed that when the Civil Rights Bill was signed, majority of the people that's voting Republican were Democrats.
Yes, that's true.
That is probably true.
Lyndon Johnson is said to have said, as he signed the bill, made it an act, that was the end of the Democratic Party in the South for his generation, if not longer. And but it was a gamble, or if you like, what is it? What am I talking about? It's neither a risk nor a gamble. It was a price he was willing to pay.
Why are you two imports analyzing American politics?
Because it's a free country and we can. And because I think we both love this country and have come here and made it our own. And because the great thing about this country, I think, unlike any other country on earth, is that it will accept wastrels and like the two of us, with open arms, and as it has always welcomed immigrants for forever. And whether we are...
Wretched refuse of the teeming shore, that's you and me.
That's you and I.
The sweepings. I mean, if there's an implied challenge from the question, which I'd be sad to think that there was, because it very seldom does come up, I suppose I could claim I'm the father of 3 Americans, which gives me some right to comment. And I do, in fact, pay the federal income tax, even though I
3 children.
don't live without them. Yeah.
Right.
And actually, I've said in print, after the main effect on September 11th, on me was to make me decide that I shouldn't put off taking out citizenship papers, because I realized I had become an American, and that it was silly not to do it anymore.
We got to go to Denver, and at the Cable Center in Denver, if you've just joined us, our students from Colorado State University and the University of Denver, and they're involved out there in a project that is Bridges to the Future. Let's ask our first student to give her name and school. I guess you're going to give your first name so we can watch the security problems. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Bobby, and I'm from Colorado State University. And I'd like to pose a question to each of you gentlemen about media ethics and how they influence our society. Many of individuals accuse the media as giving all of our younger generation bad morals. However, is our media just giving us what reality is, or is it what we want to see, or is it a kind of chicken and the egg, which comes first kind of situation?
Thank you, Bobby. Andrew Sullivan.
I don't think that the media is destroying people's morals. I really don't. I think that the bottom line of most media in a free society, as opposed to a closed society, is that it wants to get viewers, and that means that it's desperately trying to give you what you want. Which means I think there'll be a lot of dross out there, as well as a lot of good quality stuff. I don't think there's ever been a time in American and world history when the choices for media and for analysis and for news and for entertainment have ever been this broad. And one of the wonderful things about the internet, to toot my own horn and have had an amazing time for the last 2.5 years doing this website, is that you can now publish yourself.
How many hits do you get a day?
Last month, 1.1 million people, 1.1 million visits came to the site from about 250,000 people.
For the whole year? Or?
For the month.
For the month.
2 days ago, 63,000 visits in one day.
Let's go back.
That's because he was plugging my book.
The George Orwell book.
Yes, the George Orwell book. It's called Why a Will Matters, available at fine stores.
I
thought you were going to be waving a copy.
You're getting very good.
I'm Americanizing.
If you go to andrewsullivan.com, you can buy Christopher Hitchens' book directly and help the site as well.
Let's go back to Colorado. Next student, please.
Is this a great country or
give us
what?
your first name.
Fantastic.
Hello, Denver.
Hi, my name's Heather. I'm from Evergreen, Colorado. I'm from DU. My question is to both of you. Do you think that democracy in Iraq, would there be a regime change? Do you think democracy is possible? Paul Wolfowitz suggested a sort of denazification program that happened after World War II to happen in Iraq. And do you think that it would be possible?
Christopher Hitchens.
Excellent question. Heather, I've been in northern Iraq, the Kurdish areas, well, Kurdish and Turkmenish areas. They're currently living under an Anglo-American air cover umbrella, have been since the end of the last Gulf War. That's to say for about 10 years. In that region, there are elections. In the town of Erbil, one of the main cities, there are 21 newspapers published. There's every sign of a civil society emerging. Remember, this was an area that was very much racked before all this, not just by the poison and chemical tactics of Saddam Hussein. I've been to the town of Halabja where those chemical weapons were used, and there are people still with burning, inflamed injuries from it. Not just the terrible massacres they survived, but there are also quite a lot of inter-tribal rivalry and inter-clan rivalry in Kurdistan. There's every sign of that somewhat being overcome. So we don't have to speculate all that much. We know that in quite a large chunk of the country that's already been emancipated from Saddam Hussein's tyranny, there is a functioning civil society and the beginnings of a democracy. So I think that means that those of us who favor regime change aren't just having to make it up, or rather perhaps just hope for the best. We know the Iraqi and Kurdish peoples have it in them, and they have the aspiration for democracy and the education for it, and the thirst for it too.
The problem...
Now, I mean, there is a downside, as everybody knows. I mean, there are religious and other differences under the surface, but so there were in in Kurdistan before.
Let me come back to you all as we go to Cookeville, Tennessee next. You disagree with the president. Go ahead, please.
Hi, gentlemen. It's an honor to be on. I thank you for that. The previous question, which was posed to Democrats only, okay, did we as Democrats favor the election of a liberal or a moderate minority leader? Okay, I personally favor a liberal because I feel like we need the balance because of Tom DeLay and Mitch McConnell. But I'm curious as to what your two guests feel. What do they think would best help the Democratic Party?
Thanks. Andrew Sullivan.
I think the liberal moderate question is not as significant as a deeper question, which is that the Democratic Party seems to me it has to figure out what it's for rather than what it's against. You know, Gore ran a campaign against the wealthy, against corporations, against Bush.
He managed to get the corporations and the wealthy to pay for the campaign, too,
Yes.
which is incredibly clever.
It was and no one believed him in the first place because it was clearly put on. And the Democrats since then have been entirely negative. It seems to me that what they need to do is to be constructive, to say, if we don't favor regime change in Iraq, then what do we favor? Do we favor containment? Do we favor sanctions? Rather than just simply whining and criticizing. If they don't favor the tax cut, then what do they favor? I think what people didn't hear in the last election was a positive, constructive message. I don't think that matters whether it comes from a liberal or a moderate. What matters is that it's done positively, constructively, without this kind of sneering, whiny, Terry McAuliffe, sleazy atmosphere that currently pervades the Democratic Party's leadership.
Mr. Hitchens.
Well, as the British Conservative Party is in the process of finding out, there's nothing that historically mandates the survival of a political party. I mean, there's no iron law that says a party has to go on existing. My friend Patrick Cadell said to me in '92, when Clinton became the leader of the Democratic Party, or its nominee for president, incredibly enough, he said that he thought the Democrats would soon go the way of the Whigs, that they no longer stood for anything, that they lost their raison d'etre. They were just a fundraising and Tammany Hall vote-getting machine, that was all. And that things like that are historically condemned. And I later wrote a book about the abysmal nature of the Clinton regime. And while I was writing it, I realized that there was not one single thing you could say the Democratic Party would not do. I mean, they'd given up everything that gave them what they thought had given them a moral advantage. They'd rallied behind a self-evident crook as the president. They'd covered up for his crimes. They'd excused them. They'd taken dirty money. They still are the most corrupt party. I mean, the things that were done in the Clinton-Gore regime by way of raising money on government time with government favor eclipsed even what Richard Nixon did.
I got to go back.
It's going to be a very pitiless verdict on this.
Hold on, we got to go back to Denver. What's our next student's question?
Yeah, I'm Patrick. I was wondering, with regards to the internet and the media, how do you see the future shaping up, being that you can now start an online news service on the internet for basically free, thereby taking the power away from just the wealthy elites to control the media? And how do you think that will shape the future?
It's fabulous, and I advise anybody that wants to make their voice heard to actually get on there and do it themselves. There's this amazing new realm of the media out there. We're calling it the blogosphere, but it's basically a lot of amateurs who are doing better jobs than the professionals, seeing stuff out there that is ignored. And there's no question that we also have a real problem in the media elite. It is blinkered, it is skewed, it is run by a small group of people who talk to themselves. The media missed this election by a long shot. The New York Times last Sunday had a poll showing the Republicans with a 7-point lead in a generic question. They buried that news because they didn't want to listen to it. They didn't want to hear it. And when you have mainstream media things like the New York Times just simply skewing the news for its own agenda, it's fantastic that there are lots of people out there conducting guerrilla warfare, putting out the news for themselves.
Let's go back to...
it's a great new era.
Another student question from University of Colorado, Denver. Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Saraya. I'm from the University of Denver. My question is to both of you regarding the vagueness on this war on terrorism. Is it just going to be like countries we don't like, or is it going to be everybody who's invoking fear in their citizens, or anyone who's against America? And what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think the word terrorism was, before all this began, suffering badly from diminishing returns. I mean, it now can mean very little more than the willingness to use force in politics, though it usually means insurgent force. I think we should define this as what it really is: a war on, or war against theocracy, against the use and abuse of religion in international politics, and say we should state plainly that America stands for secular values within itself and overseas, but will take the side of those in the Muslim world who do not want to live under Sharia themselves or conduct jihad against other people, which is probably a majority. So we can't afford to look at the outcome of this civil war with indifference, because the jihad elements hope to win it by bringing this war to us. And we can't have that, we obviously won't have it. But we are also interested in seeing that the Muslim civilizations are not themselves destroyed by jihad, and Muslim society doesn't fall under it. So that's what the war is about, and that would also help you, I think, determine in advance who the friends and who the enemies were.
I concur with Christopher entirely that this is fundamentally a war, a religious war, a war against those who are using religion for political purposes. However, I do not think it's a war for secularism. The point of the American system is that by separating politics from religion, you give politics and religion its due. What we have to explain to the Muslim world is that under free government, constitutional government, your right to exercise your religion is stronger and deeper and more indelibly protected than under any current regime and despotism under which you labor. We have to tell the Muslim world that we are fighting for their freedom to exercise their own faith. And that's what we're doing. It's about freedom, not secularism as such.
I would like to ask our students out in Colorado if, and see how John Splain is out there, Steve Scully, to see if we can get a number of them to tell us, and that way we can get a lot more involved here in a little segment, what they think of the idea of going to war in Iraq, and whether or not they would join if they had to go into the military. Just get some sense of what they're thinking after we take a couple of calls, so you might look around and see if there are folks willing to stand up and tell us what their position is on all this. Let's go to Brinley, Michigan. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
I do agree with President Bush. I agree that he stayed on message during the campaign. Well, it wasn't his campaign, but maybe it was. He stayed on message, and Andrew Sullivan is completely right when he says that the Democrats didn't stand for anything. They complained, and that was it. I do have one question I want to ask is, everybody's complaining about where this huge amount of money was spent during the campaigns, and yet, where did the money go? It didn't leave the economy. It's in the economy. It's not like it just flew up into the air and disappeared. So elections are good for the economy.
Thanks. Mr. Hitchens.
Well, that's an ingenious point. I mean, I suppose the elections are certainly, they're good in a way for the media, which is one of the reasons why I think the media often don't make enough noise about campaign finance reform, that's where the money gets spent.
Let's go to Fairfax, Virginia. You're on the air.
Yes, I think it was well enough that the president had declared war on terrorism. Unfortunately, I see that he did not assemble the correct instrumentalities with which to pursue it. What you see is a global condition, and it's a real war, and that you need to understand what your field of values are. And in that field of values, I see countries in that region that more or less tend in our direction, in the direction of our system of values. I can give you, let's say, as an example, India, Israel, Turkey, the emerging nations of the CIS, Russia, and the Stans, and all of them are threatened by this phenomenon. We should have the correct approach should have been, in my opinion, would be to create a dedicated alliance, not some sort of coalition, but an alliance in that region.
All right, sir. Thanks, Mr. Sullivan.
I think that's emerging. There's no question that Turkey and Israel are signing off on the impending war or impending conflict of some sort. But you've got to be realistic. You know, you have to, in the diplomatic world, assemble together coalitions that work. You've got to make some compromises in the real world. You've got to understand that we've got to actually ally in a few cases with some unsavory characters in order to get the job done. So I do think there is a coalition building here that actually, I mean, I think people misunderstand Bush a lot on this. They talk about him as if he's a unilateralist, a cowboy. He's not at all. He's a man who picked Colin Powell to be his Secretary of State. A key part of Bush's success is the mix he has, the mix of determination, ferocity, and will with tactical flexibility. And that's why Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Powell are such an important part of the mix.
Mr. Hitchens.
Well, a slight quibble with the grammar of your question. I mean, I think it's not that the president declared war on terrorism, it's that Islamic fascism declared war on us. At least that's the way around I remember it. And that also leads me to make a distinction between myself and Andrew about the Allies matter. The two countries that incubated Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and financed it and helped it and trained it and so on were Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, up until then thought of as already allies. Okay? The great unspoken thing about the administration's policy, because they can't afford really to say it in public, is that they've realized the total failure of the client-state system, the kind of Nixon doctrine, where you try and rule by proxy through shady dictatorships like the Saudi oligarchy or the Pakistani secret police. The Pakistanis have helped out yet again, you may notice, by helping North Korea to acquire missile technology for its developing nuclear weaponry. Dumping these client states means more or less inevitably you have to place some sort of bet on local democratic procedures. You have to therefore hope, for example, that there will be and work towards democratic elections in Iraq. And in this respect, I think the key country is Iran. Nearly 70 million people, though of course millions of them are forced to live overseas by their ghastly government, but they too, I think, have and will exert their right of return. Every indication is that the Iranian people are on their own without any outside help, outgrowing and transcending theocracy and hoping to rejoin the democratic world. That I think that's the hinge event potentially in the region, and I think it's absolutely terrible that the president and his team have made no public effort at all to extend the hand of friendship to Iran, to restore diplomatic relations, to resume aid and trade. So Iran is not only treated like a pariah state, it's insulted as part of the axis of evil. It's an absolutely glaring and horrific failure on the part of the Bush's foreign policy.
With all due respect, Christopher, that's silly.
With all due respect, it's silly. It's either silly or it's not.
Well, without any due respect, it's silly. It's crazy. What the axis of evil speech said was that the regime is evil, not the Iranian people who wish to get rid of that regime. And in fact, by making that distinction so clearly, Bush gave enormous hope to the Democrats in Iran and to the secularists in Iran who want to topple that disgusting regime. And the most important thing, I agree with you, I couldn't agree with you more, Iran is a much more important strategic country than Iraq. But one of the great goals of regime change in Iraq is regime change in Tehran against those mullahs. And I think the policy is not, by reaching out to the government of Iran as we now have it, we're merely exactly engaging in the coddling up to dictators that you oppose.
I want to go back to our students in Denver. We have a bunch standing before the microphones, and the purpose of this little segment is to hear from you. Tell us what you think about this whole situation in Iraq. Who do we have at the microphone first?
My name is Paige. I'm from the University of Denver, and I actually have a lot of faith in Bush as a president, but I think our country really has a lot of questions about war, and right now we're just not ready to fully support because we haven't gotten enough information, and it's a really scary situation that we've been put in when the country really doesn't know what the effect will be for or against war 5-10 years down the road. You know, we have no idea how that's going to be affecting our economy and defense for our country. And so right now, we just haven't been given enough information to fully support President Bush to go into.
I'm going to ask some of the students to, thanks, Paige, very much. Make some notes here, so we'll come back to you. But how about another one of our guests out there at the Cable Center? Go ahead, please.
My name's Kristen. I'm a student at Colorado State University, and I wouldn't say that I'm for war, but I'm definitely for action. I just feel that by non-action against Iraq, that we're just setting ourselves up to be victims once again. And I would just wonder what caliber of a catastrophic event is going to have to occur for us to get our UN allies to support us in some type of an action against them.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the next student at the center. What do you have to say about this potential war situation?
I'm Andrea Love from the University of Denver, and I agree with Paige saying we really don't have enough information to really believe this. And I also love the excuse, but what are we waiting for, a mushroom cloud? And in my recollection, I could be very wrong, but I have yet to hear of a dictator that attacked the most powerful country in the world and expected to live. I mean, he may be insane, he may be crazy, nobody doubts that he's evil, but he really likes being in power, and by attacking the U.S. would really not be one of the smartest things he's ever done.
Next student on the other side. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. My name is Alan. I think that we were caught completely off guard on September 11th, and I would hate to have that happen again before this country is roused in some kind of response. I think that we can be more proactive against potential threats to our citizens, and I would hate to lose 3,000 more as we wait and mull over a decision when there is a decisive action to be taken right now.
Would you go to the military if you had to?
I would.
Next student. Thanks for joining us this morning. Go ahead, please.
Thank you.
My question is, do you not fear that if we do take action in Iraq, there'll be even more recruits happening in Al-Qaeda and even more people wanting to be against America?
And what about you? How do you feel if somebody said that they were going to draft both men and women for this effort? Would you go?
No, I would not.
Next student, please.
Well, I was just going to say that going to war, we've given him a chance. We've given Iraq a chance, and they continue to defy UN sanctions. It's not about the U.S. going to war. It's about following up on the sanctions that have already been imposed.
Would you go on the service?
Yes, absolutely.
Next student, please, on the other side.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Singleton from Colorado State University, and I just think that it's kind of ironic that we're fighting for freedom and we're fighting for democracy, yet we see people, 40,000 people saying no, I don't think it's a good idea to go to war against Iraq, and it just doesn't seem to add up to what we're standing for.
What do you say? You say 40,000 people saying no. Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about the people in Washington who protested against the war, people all across the world, actually.
All right, thanks.
And we're, okay.
Another student? Is there one more over on the other side? Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Cassie. I'm from Colorado State University. And I just wanted to say, I know that a lot of us don't have the necessary information to say, yes, let's go to war. But I think action is necessary, and we can't sit back and just let things happen to us and not do anything about it. I think now more than ever, it's important for Democrats and Republicans to put faith in the president and stand behind him, say we're all Americans, instead of trying to hide behind party lines.
Thanks. Gentlemen, go back to what Paige said. We don't have enough information, she said. What do you say to that?
I'm totally fed up with hearing that, actually. I feel a rather strict mood with the students this morning. She sounds just like Tom Daschle used to sound like. The president hasn't made his case. Go and do some reading of your own. Go and inform yourself. Who do you think is going to do the job for you? There are lots of ways of looking this up. There are excellent books to read. There's a very good new one by a man named Kenneth Pollock. It's produced by the Council on Foreign Relations. It has the terrible title, The Threatening Storm, but it's the case to beat. It's the case you have to vanquish if you're against intervention. So don't wait to be spoon-fed on this. You should have mugged up on it by now, I would say. There is going to be a meltdown of the Iraqi regime no matter what. Bear this in mind. I mean, the Saddam Hussein regime is in the process of imploding. There will therefore be a post-Saddam Iraq to worry about, with quite a lot of chaos and instability and misery and violence, no matter what we do. The question is whether we're going to just watch it or whether the United States and the international community is going to involve itself or not. And I think that makes it something like a no-brainer. I don't know why Brian asks you why you're, or whether you would go to be soldiers, because it seems to me that conspicuously in this case of this war, It's more dangerous to be a civilian than to be in the army. The whole point about this war is that it's a war that began on our own soil. I feel that I live in a quite tall building in downtown Washington, D.C. I'm much more likely to be the object or the target of violence than I would be if I was wearing a uniform on the American airstrip in Qatar, for example.
Let me address the question that another of the students asked, which is about why would Saddam do this, considering he might get popped off as a result. First of all, he may get popped off anyway from his own country. Secondly, that's not the point. The point is proxy attacks. These people are very smart. Rather than actually doing it themselves, they will get proxy terrorists using their weapons of mass destruction to do it for us. The other young student talked about 3,000 deaths. 3,000 is nothing compared to what we are in danger of. What September 11th showed us is that what if those planes had nuclear material? What if they had smallpox? What if they had the kind of weapons that we know that Saddam Hussein has, is building, is generating, and is hiding? That's the question. We still don't know, for example, who was behind the anthrax attacks of last year. That's the genius of the combination of these rogue states and amorphous terroristic entities that want to destroy you and me and our free way of life.
Raleigh, North Carolina.
That's the threat.
Come on in here. Sorry to keep you waiting.
That's okay. Hi, I'm Jane, and I was hoping there was an in-between line because I've been waiting to hear something, and I think I just heard from Christopher and Mr. Sullivan reasoning enough that I'm now on the agree with the president side. Most appreciative of C-SPAN, most appreciative also, as Mr. Sullivan mentions, about the news that is available, whereas in years past, decade ago maybe even 5 years ago, that was so canned, that was so controlled by a few people. It is thrilling that we now have more access to as close as we're going to get to the truth.
Do you go on the internet yourself?
Yes, I do. And I kind of, surf around, and I've been on those websites before that you have represented this morning, WorldNet Daily as well, and just try to keep myself informed, and that was going to be my comment. Well, I don't know yet because I'm just trying to listen to those who perhaps have more access to information than I do, but Christopher Hitchens just made the point, what more do I need?
Thanks, caller. Let's go to Falls Church, Virginia. You don't agree with the president. Tell us why.
Well, I can't say I have a taste for his... I don't particularly care for him because he has a taste for the gutter, exemplified by his and his jackals at Saxby Chambliss's attack on the patriotism of Max Cleland, a man who paid a catastrophic price in a war that Bush and Chambliss took a pass on. But my question is for Christopher Hitchens. What gives me pause is you wrote in your Nation column, withdrawing from the Nation, that one reason that the left should support a war to liberate Iraq is because an abiding cause of the left over the last few decades has been the Kurds. Mm-hmm. But don't you think there's a very real possibility that in order to appease Turkey, in order to ensure Turkey's cooperation, that the U.S. will turn a blind eye to savage repression on behalf of by the Turks against the Kurds in order to keep the Kurds from declaring their own state? And since, as you said, they've developed their own civil society, do you feel that would be endangered by they would feel emboldened to declare their own independence, and then Turkey would say, well, not so fast?
Okay, well, for those who don't know the background to this, thank you for the question. The Kurds are the largest people in the world without a nation state of their own. We don't actually know quite how many there are of them, probably 24, 25 million at least. And they live, unfortunately for them, just where the borders of Iran, Iraq, Turkey and Syria meet. It isn't a very hospitable area. And they're protected mainly by their skills as mountain dwellers. They've always been a hill people, and that's what's kept them going. Well, look, it's true that if you encourage Kurdish autonomy in any one of those countries, you encourage it in the neighboring ones too. And neither Iran, Turkey, nor Syria, certainly not Iraq, want to see the emergence of a stronger Kurdish autonomy, but they are going to see one. no matter what happens. The European Union, for example, at the moment is blocking the admission of Turkey to its ranks. It's a club that even the Islamist party that just won the election very much wants to join. They say, well, you can't join until you've given more guarantees of autonomy for your vast Kurdish population. In effect, recognize that there are two nations within Turkey. I don't really think the United States can offer the Kurds less than that. And since they are and have been our allies and are already fighting against Saddam Hussein and have already partially defeated him, I think they have a very reasonable chance of coming out of this ahead. But you're quite right. There will be pressure from people in the conservative ranks here and the people who are the friends of the Turkish government to water down the commitment to Kurdistan. But I hope people will be vigilant about it.
Andrew Sullivan, what do you two now disagree about? I mean, we first invited you here some time ago, and there was a lot of disagreement. You sound like you two come from the same side now.
No, I don't think we do at all. I mean, Christopher is a man of the left, and I'm not. I think that it's more interesting to see why we agree. And why we agree is because I think we both saw on September 11th something really quite astonishing. And we saw around us some weakness, not in the general population at all, among our peers about recognizing what that threat was and countering it. And that common purpose should overcome, I think, any of our ideological differences at this moment in time. So we are at war against a truly dangerous, theocratic, Islamist enemy. And from my point of view, whether we agree or disagree about redistributing wealth, whether we agree or disagree about our religious faith, whether we agree or disagree about any number of other domestic issues, should be put aside for the moment. Not always, and I don't agree with him on many things, because of the current crisis. And I think that was the message also of this election, to tell you the truth. I think people were saying, look, we're not going to stop being Democrats. We disagree with all sorts of issues. There are all sorts of internal debate in this country, and thank God for it. But at this moment in time, we have a president that we trust, and we want to prosecute and win this war.
By the way, the debate starts at about 10 o'clock in the UN, and they expect between 60 and 90 minutes of discussion before the vote comes. Christopher Hitchens and Andrew Sullivan are at our table this morning. And we're joined by over 40 students from both Colorado State University and the University of Denver in Denver at the Cable Center, which was constructed by the cable television industry, put on the campus as an educational spot run by Jim O'Brien. And we have a bunch of students at 10 minutes of 6 o'clock their time that are 10 minutes of 7 their time, up and about. And we want to go back and hear some more from our students. Tell us your first name and give us your comment on all this.
Hi, I'm Jessica, and I am from Colorado State University. And I wanted to ask both you gentlemen a question. And my question is, do you really feel that this war in Iraq will solve a problem, or do you think it's just going to put a Band-Aid on a bigger problem that exists in our world today?
Thank you. Let's go to another student. We'll come back and get a bunch of reaction and questions in here. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Diana, and I was just curious as to what you gentlemen think the UN's role should be in the war against terror.
UN's role in the war against terror. Let's go back to the other side. Go ahead, please. Who's got a question? Go ahead.
My name is Annie. I'm with the University of Denver. I was actually wondering, we talk a lot about media bias, and if either of you see the media biased either way, and on top of that, how we should keep ourselves best informed outside of any kind of bias.
Let me ask you, do you see media bias?
I think that we see a bias towards wealth here, and most of the major media venues are controlled by money, and you can make arguments that it's liberal because liberals can afford, or they can afford to be liberal, or that they're owned by major corporations, so it's more conservatives. It goes both ways, I think.
Thanks. Let's go to another student in Denver. Go ahead, please. Please go ahead. That's Professor. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Yang Ming. I'm the visiting scholar from China. I'm against the possible war to Iraq. One of the reasons for Bush to make a possible war to Iraq is that Iraq violates UN UN's resolution. Of course, UN's resolution should be respected by every country. But there are still some countries in the world who that violate UN resolutions. For example, Israel. What was U.S. government's attitude to it?
Thanks. Thanks, Professor. We get the point of the question. Do you have a comment on that last question from the...
Professor Yamin is, of course, right. I think the Israelis have probably racked up the largest number of UN condemnations for the appalling mistreatment of the non-Jewish population, the other population of Palestine. And it's now admitted by everyone, and even the president himself has become the first American president to use the words Palestinian and state in the same sentence and in apposition to one another. That there are two peoples in Palestine and that there should be a two-state solution. But in the meantime, it seems that Israel is to suffer no penalty for its repeated violations, not just of the resolutions, but of the rights that the UN stands for and embodies. And this is a very serious negation, in my view, and it's the thing that threatens to jeopardize the whole project of American sponsorship of regime change in the region. Because if seen as the military ally of a racist bully and killer like Ariel Sharon, the whole appeal of the American project is to that extent diminished.
Of course,
it's a very, very serious problem indeed that the professor has identified.
One reason that Israel is in violation of some of those resolutions, though not that many, not as many as you would think, is because they face the same problem that we do of terrorism, of suicide bombers, of people who are not interested whatsoever in making peace with Israel, but in destroying Israel. Groups like Hezbollah, groups like the Palestinian entity that are basically also partly funded by people like Saddam and indeed the Islamists who want to destroy the state of Israel and that join with Saddam and the Saudis and many other Arab regimes in a fanatical Hitlerian anti-Semitism that wants to see Israel taken off the map. Now, the other difference is quite obvious. Israel is not threatening the world with giving terrorist entities weapons of mass destruction to destroy other countries and innocent civilians. Saddam is. And that's an absolutely clear distinction which makes the priority, obviously,
however, Israel did illegally and by piracy and deception acquire a nuclear arsenal that's in flagrant violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and maintains it still.
Yes, and if it weren't for that, if it weren't for its defense, it's sitting there with 1/10 of 1% of the land that Arabs have. If it didn't have those defenses, it would have been obliterated long ago, and you know it, and you know that these surrounding powers want Israel destroyed. Not a almost none of them even acknowledge its right to exist, and are fomenting terrorism against its civilians, which is exactly the same as the terrorism fomented against us.
The UN resolutions that have been violated, you talk about, all these violations occurred well before anyone had heard of, or before there was such an organization as Hezbollah, which arose incidentally in response to a completely illegal Israeli aggression and occupation in South Lebanon.
Are you denying that Hezbollah has very close ties with Islamist fundamentalism and terrorism?
Hezbollah means a party of God. Which
so why are you ambivalent?
I think gives a clue about its views about theocracy.
You who argue against theocratic terrorism are giving Hezbollah a pass?
Hezbollah was the organizer of the resistance to an illegal, criminal Israeli occupation.
Well, don't you think that Al-Qaeda...
They had every right, they had under international law every right to resist and repel that occupation.
Don't you think you could use the same argument about Al-Qaeda resisting the tyranny in Saudi Arabia?
Quite obviously not. Al-Qaeda is not fighting an occupation.
It seems to me
Al-Qaeda is fighting to establish...
You actually defend terrorism when it's directed against Israel, but not against the rest of the world?
It is not terroristic for a Lebanese citizen...
It is not terroristic to have suicide bombing?
It is not terroristic for a Lebanese citizen to resist a foreign occupation of his country. He has international laws on his side.
Hezbollah is not about Lebanese citizens resisting anything. Hezbollah is about the destruction of Israel, the use of terroristic tactics to kill innocent civilians. Now, why can't you condemn that?
That's what I mean by
Isn't Hezbollah the enemy?
That's what I meant earlier, Andrew, when I said that the word terrorism has become effectively useless because of propagandization and diminishing
So you
returns.
You will not condemn Hezbollah?
International law gives the right of the Palestinians and the Lebanese to resist
First
occupation.
of all, the Lebanese, as you know full well,
Al-Qaeda
is a complete
Al-Qaeda is not a
euphemism.
guerrilla organization fighting occupation.
Hezbollah is an international terrorist group funded in part from the mullahs in Iran that you despise, and yet you will not condemn it for its suicide attacks on Israel and its use of terrorist tactics.
I'm emphasizing what isn't obvious, Andrew. Okay, I'm emphasizing.
Well, I'd like you to emphasize, just for the record, what is obvious, that Hezbollah is our enemy.
Got to go back to the phones. Meadville, Oregon, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Hey, you know, if Hezbollah wants to fight, that's fine, but they don't need to go blow themselves up in the middle of, populated areas. Get an army and go fight. That's ridiculous. They're terrorists.
Well, actually, that's what they did do in South Lebanon. You could see them out in the open. You still can.
Did you have another point, Meadville?
I do want to correct Christopher's point about the Lebanese. It's Syrian-controlled Lebanon. It's nonsense to regard these Lebanese citizens. This is a Syrian satrapy controlled by a vicious anti-Semitic dictator who is using terrorist tactics to destroy the state of Israel.
Meadville, come on back.
I got just one more thing I'd like to say. This business that we got going all around the world. Look, it's all academic if we don't all stand together. The Democrats can't snivel, and everybody else. We all got to stand together and fight terrorism, or we're gonna have a sad state of affairs. There ain't gonna be no America no more. There won't be no Europe no more. We'll live in 7th century, and we'll all learn how to say Allah.
Thanks. Bel Air, Ohio, you disagree with the president. What would you like to say this morning?
Hello?
Hi, you're on the air.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to ask Chris some questions. I disagree with the president. We have an inconsistent foreign policy, which is pretty obvious. But I've heard a couple of things recently. A guy named John Curtis, who worked for the Reagan administration, said that there was Kuwaiti slant drilling into Iraq prior to the Persian Gulf War, and I wondered if this was true and that Saddam looked for different methods to deal with that.
Thanks.
I believe that it is true there was Kuwaiti slant drilling before the last Gulf War, and there's always been a question about a border dispute between Iraq and Kuwait involving the Rumaila oil field and the small islands Bubiyan and Warba that are just off the coast. And it's quite possible that the Iraqis have some claim there. Certainly, Iraqi governments prior to the Saddam Hussein regime thought that Iraq did, and indeed Kuwait was initially detached by force by British colonialism from Iraq. Many Iraqi nationalists think of it as a lost province of the country, but that wouldn't justify the annexation of the whole of Kuwait by force and the putting of the population of Kuwait City more or less to the sword by Saddam Hussein, which is what actually did happen.
This is also part of the problem of the left right now. You keep going back, finding inconsistencies, finding things we did wrong in the past, trying to find any kind of red herring apart from the fundamental crisis we now face. Are we going to tackle the threat of terrorism, which has already declared war on the United States, or are we not? Stop, if I were to give you advice, stop this sort of long litany of anti-American grievances and understand, put those behind you and go from now. If we did, for example, this is the point Christopher has made very eloquently, let's say we did at some point in the past disgracefully aid Saddam. Doesn't that make it more incumbent upon us today to rectify that error? Instead, the left wants to go back and back on its bitterness, on its anti-American trip, and it's getting nowhere. And the people are sick of it.
We need to go back to our group in Colorado. There's a lot standing up at the microphones. We want to hear from a bunch of you. Go ahead out there. Tell us what you think or what you want to ask.
Hi, my name is Nikki. I'm from the University of Denver. Well, first, just a really quick comment. I do really agree with Chris Hitchens on his comments on Palestine, and I really applaud you for that. And sorry to be going back to the Iraq thing, but where do you, if we do go to war with Iraq, where do you think we should stop? Should we start an invasion on Korea because now they have weapons of mass destruction? Where do you think that line should be drawn?
Next question from Colorado. Go ahead, please.
My name is Katie, and I'm a junior at the University of Denver. And I know we've been speaking a lot in specifics, but my question is more in the general sense of we've been talking about setting a lot of values. And Chancellor Ritchie talked about integrity. I was just wondering what you think are some attainable goals that we can set and what actions we can take to achieve these values. And do people really all have the potential to make a difference?
Next question from Colorado. Other side. Go ahead, please.
My name is Jessica, and I'm also from Colorado State University. We've been talking again a lot about values and whatnot, and we know that journalists hold themselves to a set of values that they've outlined. Do you think that they also hold a moral obligation to society?
Let me ask you what you think a good American value is, Jessica.
We were actually asked this last night, and mine was education. I think that education is the building block to get anybody to anywhere.
Next side, what do you say? What's your question? What's your comment?
My question is, what do both these gentlemen think about Scott Ritter's claims about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq?
What do you think of it?
I think he has a lot of valid points, and I think it's important to know that he's a primary source instead of listening to what other people have to say, because he's actually been there and he is a former UN weapons inspector. So
why do you, let me ask you this, why do you believe him and not any of the other inspectors, and none of them have said the same things he said?
It's not that I don't believe it, but I think he has a lot of valid points about what we've been doing for the past 10 years with the sanctions and the destruction it's been causing the Iraqi people, and I don't understand how it's going to help them if we bomb them.
Thanks,
so
Soraya. Let's go to the other side again. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm from the University of Denver. And my question I have two things. First, do you actually think we're going to go to war with Iraq? And if we do you think we'll have more terrorist acts occur? Because after 9/11 and like the anthrax scare, there haven't really been many more like terrorist acts. But if we go to war with Iraq, do you think other terrorist groups will react in other ways?
Sam, what's your instincts? Are we going to go to war?
I hope we don't, but I'm not really sure if we are.
Next side, please. Go ahead, Denver. You're on.
Hi, I'm Andrea from the University of Denver, and I just kind of want to bring up the point that we're talking about all these, 3,000 Americans that have died. About the thousands of people that die every day, every week in Iraq because we bomb their water treatment facilities and their electricity plants and all these sanctions on them. And like if we go to war, we have more or less remote control planes with bombs on them. We can be 500 miles away, and we aren't in trouble. Yet we're bombing these people we can't see. And we've been doing this for 4 years now, and yet now we're just trying to declare war now. Where is the justice in this? Wow, 3,000 Americans, thousands of them, Iraqi citizens every week die.
Next side, please. Go ahead.
My name's Tom. I'm a DU student. I think it's interesting. There have been several polls about whether we should go to war, and one poll is, should we just go to war? And with that question, people generally say yes. But when it's added that we may lose American lives in the war, the poll results go down with less people wanting a war. It's very obvious that you can't win a war without ground troops. I was wondering, is anybody taking into consideration that we're going to lose lives on the ground in Iraq?
Thanks. Let's stop there for a moment and pick up. Christopher Hitchens, any of those things you want to comment on?
Yes, a lot of them. First, I'd like to just caution everybody, I do this all the time, don't say war on Iraq. Don't say war with Iraq. There's no one wants that, and there isn't going to be one. There is going to be a conflict with Saddam Hussein, an intervention to remove Saddam Hussein from the leadership of Iraq. It's a quite different thing morally as it is politically, and it's just in the language people are talking about it as if it was other than what it is. Now, I'd like to take two of the questions at least. Scott Ritter claims to know more than he can possibly know. It's as simple as that. No one can know what he says he knows. You'd have to have had a regime change in Iraq and a complete inspection already before you could certify what he certifies. But it isn't claimed that Iraq yet has, for example, or Saddam Hussein, I'm doing it myself now, Saddam Hussein has nuclear weapons. It is claimed that it's asserted he's not going to be allowed to get them. We're not going to find out what it would be like if he did have them. Thus, to your point about North Korea, where I've also been, I'm quite well up on my axis, by the way. I've been to North Korea and Iraq, and I've been to both sides of the DMZ in Korea, and the impressive fact about that very bleak landscape, which is fantastic concentration of force and violence and weaponry, is that the capital city of South Korea, Seoul, is about 20 miles south of it, which means it would be destroyed in the first round of any renewed Korean war. The war would end with the destruction of the North Korean regime too, but it would start with the destruction of the capital city of a major democracy. Now we know the North Koreans have uranium rods. They are in a position where they can talk deterrence, where they can impress us with their deterrent effect. Just imagine if Saddam Hussein was in that position. That's what you have to do. Syria, I think was the name. Or was it Soraya? I'm not sure. Had a question earlier too, which we didn't get back to. But others have brought up, what if this makes more people dislike us, is how it roughly goes. Sometimes it's what if it makes more people join Al-Qaeda. I think this is an unduly pessimistic question, in a way. There's every chance that a huge number of Iraqis, the majority of them, will welcome an intervention to remove Saddam Hussein. I certainly don't know myself any Iraqi or Kurd who doesn't hope for it round the clock. Second, the Al-Qaeda forces appear, for some reason, to dislike us anyway. I don't really see how they could hate us anymore. I wouldn't mind giving them something they could really hate me about, like removing a man who they seem to admire, Mr. Saddam Hussein. And if that makes more people join Al-Qaeda, well, that's more casualties for Al-Qaeda to take. They want to be martyrs. We're here to help.
Andrew Sullivan, let me just ask you, Sam asked whether or not you think we're going to go to war, and won't that cause more terrorist activities in this country?
There's no evidence that when we've actually tackled these fascists and murderers, that they have been successful in getting more recruits. In fact, the opposite is the case. Since we went into Afghanistan, a war that lots of people also opposed, where has been the huge Al-Qaeda where has been the great uprising of the Arab street? It doesn't happen. There's never been an example in which it has happened. That part of the world, first of all, does two things. They're desperate for democracy. They're stifled by their own regimes. In Iraq and elsewhere, they want to actually have regime change. And they also respect power and our conviction. The only thing that can keep those people enslaved is our own weakness. And secondly, on the North Korea thing, it's a fantastic example, because there we have a situation in '94 where we had news and evidence that they were developing weapons of mass destruction. And you had two choices, confront them or appease them. And Clinton and Carter constructed a policy of dialogue, of talk, of peace negotiations, of incentives, engaging these murderous tyrants who were starving their own people as if they were reasonable human beings. We find out 6 or 7 or 8 years later, lo and behold, they ignored us. They built a nuclear bomb, or the capacity for a nuclear bomb anyway. Now imagine if Saddam Hussein has a nuclear capacity, we can do nothing. Any war against him would lead to a nuclear conflagration. He then has the entire territory that he controls as a launch pad for every vile terrorist organization in the world. If we wait, if we do not take him on, then we are essentially creating the possibility for a far bigger war, far worse conflict, far more deaths than we do if we go in now. It's just like if we'd stopped Hitler in 1936 rather than 1939. So much awful devastation and loss would have been avoided. The question is not war or peace. The question is war now or war later.
You got to grab a phone call. Hatfield, Massachusetts, you're on the air.
Hi, good morning, C-SPAN. Thank you for taking my call. Appreciate it. Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Sullivan is applying clear logic to the equation. Your enemies can't hate you any more than they already do, so have no fear when you attack them. And, I think that, and I'll just take 20 seconds here, I think that the difference between rogue, outlaw, state-sponsored terrorists who finance and assist any international terrorist group, but that nexus of weapons of mass destruction, rogue, outlaw, state sponsors, and international terrorist groups is a fear and a risk that we can't ignore. I also think that if Al Gore had become president, that he would have chose to apply the same logic to this. And I would like to get the gentleman's response. Do they estimate that a President Gore would have responded similarly to the way President Bush is responding?
Mr. Hitchens.
No, sir, I do not. I mean, a man who cracked up over a recount in Florida and basically burst into tears and grew a beard and went all runny is someone I'm very glad was not president on the 11th of September. And as for his choice of vice president, what can I say? No, I don't actually believe that there's a special providence that watches over the United States. I wish I could believe in such a thing. I don't. But it's tempting sometimes to think there might be, in that we were this close to having those guys in charge that day. And my mind refuses to engage with how ghastly a thought that is. Either Afghanistan would now be a glowing, smouldering ruin, or it would still be run by the Taliban. One or other of those, I think, would be the likeliest.
Hatboro, Pennsylvania. Hatboro, go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to ask them just one question to your panel there. Name me one thing directly that Iraq has done to the United States. directly, not what they're building up, not what they're going to do. They have not done one thing directly to the United States. This would be the first time this country has ever attacked another country that has not attacked them. Now, I'd like to listen to what your panel has to say.
Well, it isn't the United States versus the Saddam Hussein regime. It's the United Nations, it's the international community, as you must have noticed. The resolutions are unanimous and binding. As far as I know, unless you exempt the possibility, which some serious people do entertain, that the first bombing of the World Trade Center had an Iraqi secret police hand in it. I'm agnostic about that, by the way. There is no example of the sort you seek, but you wouldn't need it. This is an enforcement of international law and international standards.
It's also true that Saddam killed many American soldiers and Allied soldiers in the first Gulf War after violating international law. So there are actually families of people in this country whose sons and daughters were killed by that man.
Attenborough, would you want to come back on both these gentlemen and give us your comments?
Absolutely. When they attacked, we attacked them in the Desert Storm.
Excuse me? Excuse me. He invaded Kuwait. I mean, this is like saying we attacked Hitler first. I mean, it's absurd. Just go back and read your history.
Let the gentleman finish. Go ahead.
I know my history. You're going to let me finish. Number one, we came over to protect Kuwait because they invaded Kuwait, because they had a border dispute. We were over there to protect Kuwait. We attacked them, they defended ourselves, and they again attacked our soldiers. Just the same as anybody else in this country would do the same if they were attacked.
Leave it. Leave it. I think that should speak for itself, I think. Really.
Let's go back to Denver. What do you say, students? Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Hillary from the University of Denver, and I was just wondering, last night we also spoke of two other values that we hold strong here, and those are unity and patriotism. And I was just wondering if you think that the unity and patriotism within the U.S. has changed due to the divided thoughts on whether or not to go to war with Iraq.
Hillary, would you tell us, for those people watching, what you're talking about when you say last night? What are you involved in?
Well, we've got the University of Denver and Colorado State University together last night, two different classes from each school, and we basically sat down and discussed what we thought were important values for our country right now and overall.
What did you learn from that discussion?
Well, I think that I have a lot of the same views as a lot of people that I spoke with last night and that were speaking, and I think that I just haven't been able to put into one word a certain value that I hold strong. And last night I was able to see different words that could define how I feel as well.
Let me say that I think that there is a very important distinction between the concept of unity and the concept of patriotism. In a democracy, we don't have to be unified to be patriotic. In fact, on the contrary, it seems to me important and extremely good that in this country, in the last election, we had basically a 53-47 split, which is an extremely closely divided country, even though President Bush won a big victory. Compare that with the pseudo-awful, disgusting elections in which Saddam Hussein got 100%. No one dared to vote against him.
And 100% turnout as well.
And 100% turnout.
Even more impressive.
Yes.
Let's go back to Denver. Next student, please.
Hi, Christina from Colorado State University. We've been talking about privacy lately on campus and in the university, and I was wondering what you gentlemen feel in our current situation, how we can maintain security without our personal privacy being truly affected.
Do you feel your own personal privacy is threatened?
Not at this moment, but I feel if we did go to war, it would definitely be invaded a lot more than it is now.
Thanks. Next student, please. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Jessie, and I'm from Colorado State. And I was just wondering what you three gentlemen think about what American value we should remember during the current crisis.
What one would you like to remember during this crisis?
I think trust and respect for each other and ourselves and our leaders is important.
Trust and respect for ourselves and our leaders. Mr. Sullivan.
I would use the virtue of courage. This is a very scary time we live in. I think we live now under the threat of and possibly the inevitability of an attack upon us with chemical, biological, or even nuclear weapons. Just because it hasn't happened in the last year or so doesn't mean it cannot happen or will not happen. And we look around us, and war is also a terrifying and awful thing. And we don't see an easy solution to any of these things. In those circumstances, we have to express fortitude and courage in facing the threats, not running away from them, not denying them. And then also, I think, moderation. We want to go through with this war with restraint, clarity, and prudence. I don't think we want an impulsive or reckless war. We want something that was going to make the world a safer place, not a more dangerous place.
Harmington, Connecticut, you're on the air.
Good morning. My problem with President Bush's policy towards Iraq is what I see as a double standard or hypocrisy. At the same time that President Bush condemns Iraq for certain issues, such as terrorizing neighbors, he gets in bed with the Red Chinese. He has a problem. The Red Chinese certainly threaten their neighbors, Taiwan. The Red Chinese have conquered a neighboring country, Tibet, and subjected its people and destroyed a culture. The Red Chinese have taken down an American plane in international airspace and held American soldiers prisoner. Red Chinese weapons were found in Al-Qaeda caves in Afghanistan. The very same standards that George Bush is applying against Iraq and his intentions to liberate the country apply towards Red China. Plus, Red China has weapons of mass destruction targeted at American cities. But he has a premier of China at his ranch in Texas. What's the difference? Plus, Dick Cheney, as CEO of Halliburton, bought oil from Iraq. You know, what's the big threat? I don't understand. I don't understand the hypocrisy.
Your reaction, Mr.
Well,
Hitchens.
I must say it makes me feel young again to hear the words Red China pronounced with such menace, and if I may say so, so often also in the same question. The fact of the matter is, some countries are too big to stand up against. I mean, I will let you into a secret of realpolitik. We detest, for example, what the Russians and formerly the Soviet Union do in Chechnya, but there's nothing we can or propose to do about it. They're too big to stand up against. The charges you make against Red China are, as far as I could tell, all of them true, except I don't think they help to arm Al-Qaeda. They also face a Muslim insurgency within their own borders, and for this reason are willing to be friendly with the United States at the moment. And they have a vote on their permanent member of the Security Council, so they will get much nicer treatment than another country would if, say, you didn't doubt, by the way, that they repeatedly invade or threaten with invasion Vietnam. But there it is. There it is. He mentioned Taiwan and Tibet too, but not Vietnam.
By the way,
which is a country close to my heart. So there it is. I'm afraid they're just too big, and they've both got vetoes on the UN Security Council.
On a different note, on my desk here is a cartoon from the New York Times a couple weeks ago by Robert Grossman. It's in a column by Judith Shulevitz, and it shows a man named Orwell crawling across the ground and two little figures on his back. This one is supposed to be Andrew Sullivan, and this one is supposed to be you. You look like a little angel there.
Mr. Grossman came up to me the other day at a party in New York, and I think he wanted to apologize for this caricature. But I said, no, leave it the way it is. It's too flattering for words.
But you look like a cute little fellow.
He looks like the Christopher Robin that we all knew and loved.
And what do you look like here, Andrew Sullivan?
I leave that for others. He certainly got the plaid shirt right.
But what's going on here between the two? Because I know you've been dialoguing, as they say, on the internet. Here's the book, Why Orwell Matters. We have students out there that are studying people like Orwell, I suspect, or do you suspect they're studying him?
Well, I hope so, and then again, I hope not, because in a way it's death for an author to become a set book. I mean, he becomes respectable and compulsory, and I think a lot of people have been made to read Animal Farm in 1984. I think it's still likelier than not that that's become a compulsory book. I wrote my book partly to restore Orwell as a figure of controversy, as someone who was always in his lifetime involved in important fights on matters of principle. He never would have expected to become a sort of teacher's pet or role model, but it's still essential that people read.
Was he a conservative or a liberal?
Orwell was a socialist all his life, and quite a, on quite a hard left definition of that too. Anti-Stalinist, but more towards the left opposition, sometimes called Trotskyists.
Were you used to be a Trotskyist?
I did, yes. Some of the best years of my life I gave to that. Learned a lot from it too.
And it was on this program. It was on this program where you admitted that you were no longer a socialist.
I'm afraid I had to say.
Riverside, Illinois. Go ahead, please. You're on the air. Riverside, please go ahead.
Hi. Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi.
I have a question, but first, it seems to me that if the students were allowed a broader range of oversight, for example, I personally have deliberately joined organizations of the left and right. For example, I joined the National Organization for Women and the ACLU, and believe it or not, the John Birch Society. And the publications I subscribe to are a broad mix, both of yours, by the way. And it's fascinating, and one can only seem to come down on the right after reading all of these. If the students were to do that, if they were be permitted to have a broad reading scope, I think there would be less confusion in some of their statements. However, it isn't permitted under the academic regimen we find throughout the country today.
Caller, just stay right where you are. Wait a minute, hold on. Stay right where you are. I want to ask one of the students who's at the microphone, first of all, to introduce themselves. Who's the gentleman there? Tell us your name again.
Alan.
Alan, our caller from Riverside, Illinois, suggests that you're not given a broad range of reading in your classes. Would you agree with him?
I think that's a fairly absurd statement. I think that perhaps if our curriculum is more of a liberal leaning, then it's more upon ourselves to look at other sources of information, whether it's more conservative information or perhaps more liberal information. That's kind of our charge as students to broaden our scope if we feel that what we're getting in class is not sufficient.
Let me ask the other student at the microphone if she would like to tell us her name and then tell us whether or not you think the professors in your class have a broad enough range of reading.
My name is Molly, and I'm from Colorado State University, and I definitely think we have a broad range of reading. That's my only comment on that. My question actually for you gentlemen was, what is your idea of the ideal American president, and what single most important value do you feel that the president should hold? I'm going to hold on that to just a second to go back to our Riverside, Illinois caller. They suggest that they've got enough out there in the way of breadth.
It isn't true. Read about the upsets and the tearing up of the newspaper stands that goes on when something from opposing the general trend in academia appears. They go out and steal the papers on it. And there are certain publications, well written. The New York City Journal, for example, seems to me to be an excellent read and presents things a bit differently than. I believe his name is Theodore something or other, who a doctor from England. Also, he writes in the City Journal quite a bit. Oh, I'm nervous. Dalrymple, I believe his name is.
Oh, yes.
And he,
but Doctor Wright.
It's a great name,
yes,
Theodore Dalrymple.
It's a fantastic
Dalrymple.
name.
He's
we all long for a name like that.
Makes
really.
you proud to be British.
But listen,
I also teach part-time at the New School in New York. In fact, you have the honor of addressing, sir, the Professor of Liberal Studies at the graduate faculty there.
Sorry, I
can't. Completely corpsed.
I'm sorry. The idea of you as a sort of professor,
well,
and then insisting on being
it's
called
funny how often I get this reaction. It's funny how often I get this reaction. We're pressing solemnly along, pedagogically along. All I can tell our younger audience members is this: if you think you're, or if you claim you are well-read or well-educated, you're not. The best you can hope to do is to find out how ill-read you are. That's what education does. It shows you roughly how much you still have to learn. So to say I've already read enough, or I know I'm a well-rounded person, or I've got enough, is by definition untrue, I'm sorry to say.
Exactly, and I think there's part of the problem here is the cult of self-esteem, which is true in education today. It's like kids are taught, students are taught that the most important thing is to believe in yourself and to believe that you're the best thing that ever happened, as opposed to telling them you don't know anything. None of us know anything. All of us as students our entire life. You've got to get out there, find out new material, think about new things. People talked earlier about wealth in the media. The truth is that's all. That excuse is over, buddy. the internet is free. A site like mine costs nothing to read. I don't get paid for it. It's all about getting information out there and learning. And there's never been less of an excuse for a smug, lazy student to claim that he has or she has a broad education. And I wish more teachers today would tell their students that they don't even know the half of it yet and get out there and learn more.
You guys are on a roll. Would you like to continue, Mr. Hitchens?
No, I wanted to say more about Orwell for a second.
Well, you want to sell the book?
Before we, yes, I do want to promote the book. In fact, you might just...
You want to see the cover again,
yeah, that's
folks?
right.
Here, let me hold it up. Here it is.
It's just
free.
It's that, as everyone knows about 1984, Orwell modeled his horrific concept of a hermetic future, totally closed and tyrannical and hateful society, on things that had already happened, the dictatorships in Germany and Russia. But the reason why he's relevant still is if you go to North Korea or to Iraq, you would imagine these people had modeled their state on Orwell, that they'd taken 1984 and thought, could we make this work? Could we make people that miserable, that frightened, that coerced, round the clock? Could it be done? Well, we'll give it our best shot. And I think people often have a difficulty when all of these discussions we've been having about Iraq and North Korea this morning, in getting their minds around the concept of radical evil, even though the president says something's evil, it might still be true. That there are dictatorships so horrifying that you wouldn't be able to imagine living in them for a day, but that they don't plan just to keep it at that. They have plans to try and inflict this misery further. And there is a temptation among people of liberal temper and a tolerant mentality, and among sort of reflective intellectuals too, in some ways to turn away from that. To say, no, it can't be that bad. Surely there must be some reasonable compromise we can come to here. The lesson of George Orwell's life is you can't compromise with totalitarianism at home, as it were, or abroad.
The book is $24 by Basic Books, in case you're interested.
Thank you.
Coming up in 30 minutes, we go to the UN. They'll have a debate, 60 to 90 minutes, and a vote on the UN resolution that everybody's reporting will be passed. 14 to... will be one abstention, Syria, and the rest are reportedly on board on this. Our buses today are in Orlando and in Omaha, Nebraska. The C-SPAN school buses will be here for 30 minutes with the students from Colorado State University and the University of Denver. They're located out at the Cable Center, which is on the University of Denver campus. Our guests are Christopher Hitchens and Andrew Sullivan, who has a website called andrewsullivan.com. I'm about to promote you, and you want to interrupt. Athens, Georgia, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
I just wanted to ask, particularly Mr. Sullivan, about his views on selectively looking at history, because I think in the past 50 years, the U.S. has not really studied history. We've gotten involved in Panama, in Chile, in Zaire, in lots of places, and we really didn't see a long-term what we were hoping to achieve. We just wanted to replace a particular regime, and all we've done is cause worse problems for the people there.
Oh, and here we go again. Let me counter that by saying absolutely we had a goal in this country over the last 50 years. That goal was to defeat the other totalitarian system, the Soviet Union, to liberate half the world from its tyrannical and disgusting rule. And if you look at South America, if you look at Eastern Europe, if you look at whole swaths of the world that now live in democracy that didn't before, the one major difference between that and tyranny was the United States of America. I am so tired of this blame America first attitude. I thought we'd gotten rid of it. And part of the problem is that the left won't let go of that. They still suspect this country more than they suspect any other country in the world. And until they let that go, until they actually rediscover the values of what this country stood for and believe in it, they're politically dead.
Athens, come back.
Well, no, I can't let that go.
No, let's bring Athens back in and we'll get to you. Go ahead, Athens. You still there? Athens is gone. You were going to say something, Mr. Hitchens?
Well, I think, I hope Andrew doesn't mean what he just said, because it would be to say that we have no responsibility at all. We must forget any consideration of responsibility for things like the destruction of the democratic process in Chile, the murder of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, the devastation of Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, the mass murder in East Timor. None of these things, by the way, did anything to bring down the Berlin Wall, Andrew. These are acts of imperial violence and bullying. We live still with their consequences. There are unpunished war criminals like Henry Kissinger amongst us, and if people talk as if, well, we don't owe anyone an explanation for this,
I didn't say that.
that's, well...
I did not say that.
It sounded to me as if, very much as if you did.
The questioner said that we had no long-term goal, that we had no real idea what we were doing, we didn't understand history. Of course, Christopher, this country must be held morally responsible for the consequences of its actions in a complicated world. And of course, things have been done in this country that are shameful and wrong, as in every regime. But in the broad perspective, in the broad historical look, there's no question that this country has been a force for good. In fact, without this country, without the United States, both Nazism and Soviet communism would prevail. And that's the difference between freedom and tyranny. And the United States was the difference. And, you know, both of us grew up in a country that knows that very, very clearly.
Let me go back to Denver. Students at the microphone, tell us who you are and what's your comment or question.
My name is Jake, and from the University of Denver, and I was curious what you guys thought about the role of the United States as the police force of the world, and if it's become too great. That's it.
Thank you. How about let's go on to the other side. Paige, you're back with us. What would you like to say this time?
Yes, my inquiry actually really bounces off of what you guys just were talking about. And I'd just like to say I commend what the two guests were just talking about life being a continuing education, and we're never really fully there. But how does the United States democracy really compare positive and negatively internationally as far as politics go?
Thanks. We have three questions from the students in the last few minutes. One of them is, what's an ideal American president? Remember that one? And then what's your feeling about the role of the U.S. as a police force around the world? And then how does the United States' democracy compare with others? Those are three things I think you all think about. Ideal American president?
Well, I should start by saying, because we were also asked about our ideal American value. I mean, if asked to say what a value was, I hope I'd come up with a better word than integrity, by the way. Again, I still think there is probably a bit too much esteem washing around the place. That's a tautology. If you have value, you have integrity. If you have integrity, you have value. I would say for America, the thing that has magnetized me to it, and did, is its respect for the Constitution, and in particular for the Bill of Rights. It's a country, in other words, founded on written documents that are subject to revision and to review, and it's the only one that is founded on such promises. And I would, this is part of the answer to a subsequent question, there's no country I know, including my own, initially the United Kingdom, that wouldn't be better off if it adopted the Bill of Rights as their constitution.
The U.S.'s role as a police force of the world?
In other words, America also has a revolutionary role. Now, as the police force, well, you know that I have two views. I just said to Andrew that I think there has been a disgraceful record of imperialism and bullying in the past, but it's heartening, therefore, to see a country that once, I mean, America didn't extinguish the democratic process in Chile. The Nixon-Kissinger gang did that. But America, through a long process of debate and discussion, is considering sponsoring an election process in Iraq. That's all the difference in the world.
Is your movie that you're involved in, The Trials of Henry Kissinger, available around the country?
Well, alas, no network would take it because they're all such wimps and cowards. But as Andrew says, the day of the monopoly in the media is over. To a limited extent, that's true of movies too. In sort of art house type cinemas all across the country, it is being shown. One in Washington, two in San Francisco, Film Forum in New York. You can catch it, and you can make an effort to if you're in a college town, you can make an effort to have it shown there.
Andrew Sullivan, the role of the U.S. as a police force, the ideal American president, this democracy.
Let me take
the greatest upholder of the Constitution and the Union was obviously Abraham Lincoln, and in the most dire circumstances. So for that, it seems to me, he takes the palm.
The value, which I hate that word, the virtue is better. Value sounds like this sort of interchangeable, amorphous quality, is the defense of liberty, period. I mean, that's what it's about. If it's not about that, it's about the pursuit of happiness in this wonderful... The idea that a country would put the word happy, happy in its constitution is such a wonderful idea. It's that every human being might have a different idea of what it is to be happy. And not only that, but not the attainment of happiness, but the pursuit of it. Even when you fail, even when you don't get it right, that process of getting it right, that process, indeed, is all about process, which liberty gives you. That's what I love about this country, and I'm forever grateful for it giving me the space and air to breathe as someone who I think would find it very hard to fit in anywhere else. As to the president, I think that one thing we miss is something that's very intangible about political leadership, and that is simply judgment. The ability to weigh a question in real time without knowing everything about the possible consequences, because nobody ever does. I mean, going to war, for example, is an absolutely terrifying notion. We can't know for sure, but having the skill and the ability to measure a particular moment in time and make the right decision is what the ancients used to call prudence or practical wisdom. You don't have to be book smart to do that. You just have to have judgment. I actually think that our current president has it. I think people understand that. He doesn't have to have read, you know, Solzhenitsyn or Dostoevsky or Kafka or Machiavelli or Aristotle or George Orwell, but he has it, and just as Truman has it. And I must say, to counteract Christopher, the idea that he's unqualified, was unqualified, having been a two-term governor of a huge state in Texas, educated at all the best places, compared to someone like Jimmy Carter, he's immensely qualified, and indeed compared to someone like Harry Truman.
By the way, I want to tell our audience, those of the teachers in the audience, we've been offering you that free, large timeline of American presidents. Told you a couple weeks ago we had 25,000 teachers that were answering up. We're now over 41,000, and we keep rolling with this. So those teachers out there that are interested in having this in the classroom, it's about 6 by 4 feet. cspan.org, and look for cspan.org/education or /classroom, and you'll find it. cspan.org/classroom. We have about 22 minutes till we go to the UN. We have Silver Spring, Maryland on the line. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm from Burtonfield, but I could not say that. Anyhow, I support George Bush removing Saddam Hussein because, please don't cut me, those people are existing and surviving. They are not living life. But on the other way, Christopher is honest journalist. He knows history. He is a very good person. And Solomon, he loves, I think, Israel more than America because he caused problem for America. He wants war, 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 war. Look at Europe, how peaceful it is. Please.
Where did you say you were from?
I'm from Ethiopia. We're friends of Israel. We don't hate Israel, but America should get peace. You know, we need peace.
All right, thanks. Miami, Florida. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, please. Hello.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, I just have a comment. America become a bully class of the classroom, and this is what's causing all the problems in the world. I don't understand why George Bush have such double standard everywhere in the world. If he's talking about weapon of mass destructions, so why he does not treat every country who have it the same way too? Israel have it too, and everyone knows that. And of course, Russia have it, and China have it. And I only saw your program when that guy talked about China. And America really does not care only, obviously, about what they want, because they managed to best China about Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China. And if it's up to both of them to decide what's going to happen, why you put your nose there? If somebody comes and takes Hawaii and split it up, you're going to take it? And the other thing, too, Israel treats the Middle East very, very badly. The Palestinian, look what's happened to the Palestinian everywhere. And no one says anything. That's double standard, too. And always when there's a Christian people somewhere in the world they want to split, like in East Timor, America behind them 100%. But if there's some Muslim people who want sovereignty anywhere in the world, America stands against it.
Let me remind you that the last two major wars that this country was engaged in, both in the Balkans and in the Gulf, were in defense of Muslims. American lives are put on the line to defend the Muslim minority under the fascist aggression of Slobodan Milosevic. So this is just baloney, I'm afraid.
Also, to say that the United States was 100% behind East Timor is illiterate as well as, well, sectarian, I think, is what I'd have to call your attitude, sir. I mean, if you think the United States goes around the world looking for Christian minorities to protect and Muslim ones to oppose, I think you're merely a religious sectarian.
Miami, where are you from originally?
I'm Palestinian, and I'm a very proud American. I'm against Saddam Hussein. I wish he never got to power at all. I know he treats his people bad, but he treated his people bad when he was alive in the United States. He used chemical weapon when he was alive in the United States in the early 90s and late 80s, and no one says anything. Now you say all that. It's true.
How can you say nobody says anything? A moment ago you said no one ever says anything about the Palestinians. You must know that's not true.
Only started with Saddam
Presumably
Hussein.
also, if you're Palestinian, you would know that perhaps 20% of them are not Muslims. They're either Christians or of no faith. It's ridiculous to look at the world in terms of your confessional allegiance. You'll feel much better when you stop doing that.
Allies, they don't say nothing about them. But if they're not their allies, you attack them all the time.
Thanks. Okay. Back to the students. What do you have to say out there in Denver? What school are you from? Give us your first name, please.
Hi, my name's Abby, and I'm from Colorado State University. And my question is, do you think the American media has created a false sense of hope concerning the war on terrorism?
Do you, Abby?
I think it had in the beginning because I thought we were doing all right. You know, our efforts, you know, bombings, whatever, we're kind of helping. We're putting a dent on what we needed to. And then later it's like, well, it really didn't do much.
So what's your attitude about the potential war with, as Mr. Hitchens would say, Saddam?
When I think of war, it's kind of frightening. I go back and forth. Like, sometimes I'm like, we need to create peace and not war. And then other times, like, sometimes you got to take those necessary measures to take out those people out of office.
When do you think you're going to get around to sorting that out instead of just feeling these things?
I'm currently doing that right now, being a part of this.
Get on with it would be my advice.
Get a move on. We've been at war. Yeah. We've been at war for a year and a half, and if you haven't made your mind up now, you really should have.
Go to the library.
You have a comment, final comment, Abby?
Actually, I don't really have a final
My comment is I'm amazed at the gender imbalance over there. I mean, do no men get up in the morning? I guess it's true. No men can't get up in the morning. But it's interesting to me. This is another function of how well women are doing in colleges and in education around the country. I mean, what's amazing is that we're getting a fantastic gender gap now in colleges and educated people in which women are trouncing men. I wonder, where are the men out there? Why aren't they in that room?
Let's go to the other side and see if we can find one of the men students.
I'm telling you, there's hardly anyone up there.
Please give us your name and tell us what your comment or question is. Go ahead, please.
This is fine anyway. This is fine.
Oh, it's okay for you, Christopher.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Some of us like
Please go
variety.
ahead, Denver.
Hi, I'm Summer, and I'm from Colorado State. And we've been talking about this virtue of trust in our government. And I find it very hard with the current inconsistencies in foreign policy. And I was just wondering how you gentlemen felt about that.
Would you want to specify an inconsistency?
Such as with Iraq, we opt for regime change, and with North Korea, we're more into containment and deterrence and diplomacy.
We just did that.
That's because the North Koreans already have the nuclear capacity. Once they get it, you're in a terribly difficult spot to counter it. And we have to thank Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter for helping North Korea to get a nuclear capacity.
Summer, what do you say about that?
I guess I would have to say that, to me, North Korea is a bigger threat, and I think that we should be focusing on them, where in the news every day we're focusing on Iraq.
No, wait, Andrew. Okay. I don't know, perhaps you missed my gentle but authoritative take on this earlier. We've done this. I don't know when you showed up, but I told you how I'd been to the DMZ in Korea, noticed that the capital city of South Korea, Seoul, big capital of democratic country now, is only 20 miles away, how it would be destroyed in the first round of any renewed Korean hostilities. This is too high a price to pay if it can be avoided, and it looks as if it's possible that it can be. Makes it very different indeed from the situation with Iraq. You don't remember my saying any of this. How disappointing.
Let's go to another student, please, in Colorado. Go ahead, please.
Hi, hi. I had a comment for Andrew Sullivan. I was wondering why you have the feeling that we need to just move on and not focus on the past. I think it's important for us to look at the past and look at what our country has done, both good and bad, in order to understand what's going on today, and
Absolutely.
not just say, oh, we'll stop whining and...
No, as long as it doesn't cripple you from action in the present or doing good things right now, of course. Nothing that I said should be interpreted to mean that we shouldn't examine our history. However, I do think that examining American history of the past 50 years should give people a lot to be proud of in terms of what it has been able to do in expanding freedom and ending tyranny around the world. It's not without its blemishes, goodness knows. Absolutely, and I commend Christopher for bringing attention to those blemishes.
Essex Junction, Vermont, you're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call. First, I believe war has been declared on us, and whether we can debate the issue now, we will eventually have to respond to it. My question concerns inherent evil. And humans are capable of great good and great evil. And obviously this conflict and what's been declared on us is fueled by passion. And I want to know from the gentleman if they think that removing or containing Saddam Hussein will take care of the issue, or whether someone else will just come forward to replace him.
It will not solve the issue for good. There will be further dangers. There are other entities. There is Tehran, there is Syria, there is places, people, organizations like Hezbollah who want to continue the war, and we'll have to go on. In the real world, there's no final, end to anything. The war, especially against evil, is constant in every generation. The question for our generation is whether we can recognize it when it's in our midst and act against it, because previous generations have failed sometimes to do that in a timely fashion.
Dent, Minnesota, you're on the air.
Good morning. I can't understand why we're having all the talk about war, just like deciding who can kill the most, and then sit around and talk about trying to settle it. There's been practically no mention for a year or so about getting together and trying to settle things in advance. And then, if they can't, then decide who can kill the most. But why don't we get together with Saddam Hussein with a summit meeting and other nations and try and reverse the situation of the world and get to a modern civilization and come to some senses to try and settle things without being primitive cavemen-type people who can kill the most?
Caller, why do you think we're not?
Well, we don't hear anything about it. Practically no news comments about real effort, forced confrontation to talk about it and decide what can be done to settle the world down.
We have had 11 years of dialogue and sanctions and any number of attempts of resolutions to get Saddam not to be a menace to the world and to his own people. 11 years of talking. I don't know how much more talking we have to do.
Caller, what do you say to that?
I've never heard about any big meetings between Saddam Hussein and the rest of the world.
Well, I'll tell you, he's kind of a hard guy to get to see. He didn't even turn out until the last day of his own 100% election campaign the other day. He doesn't receive many visitors or many guests. He sends out as envoys. I can instance one person who I know. His name is Naji Sabri. You've seen him. He's the guy with the 8-piece suit and the smirk, shaking hands with Jacques Chirac. He's the foreign minister of Iraq. He has two brothers. Both of them have been tortured by Saddam Hussein, only one to death, the other not quite to death.
What is it in your piece?
Mr. Naji Sabri goes around as a broken, hollow, robotic hostage.
What was your story
as Saddam
about?
Hussein's envoy? That's what he thinks about us. Is that he'll send out his morally destroyed prisoners.
What was your story about Tariq Aziz, his son?
Oh, Tariq Aziz, who used to be the foreign minister, who's now deputy prime minister, has a son who was sentenced last year to 20 years imprisonment, then was released, then was rearrested, then released again, then rearrested. Tariq Aziz knows who's boss. He's the other guy you see shaking hands with Kofi Annan. Saddam Hussein uses hollowed out, humiliated hostages as his negotiators.
Last comment from Dan.
I'm just saying, see, the gentleman perfectly illustrated my point. Some people can't believe that there is real evil and cruelty and madness on this scale, that the most surely reasonable men can get together.
Dan, what do you say?
How wrong.
Been told about all the evil in that, and I believe it. I think it's true, but I don't hear any concrete evidence of forcing a discussion among various people in the world, Saddam and others, because I think we're going to see more and more terrorism, and it's going to be here. certainly well beyond my lifetime.
All right, sir, thanks. Let's go back to Colorado. Jessica Lass, you're at the microphone. What would you like to say to us?
I'm a student at the University of Denver, and I was just wondering if you think that our war on terrorism is a form of cultural imperialism.
What do you think?
I think personally that it is, that we're imposing what we think are the universal laws, but we're not taking into consideration other cultures and how they've been living and what they think is right.
Mr. Sullivan.
Where do we start? No one's forcing anybody to believe anything except the mullahs and dictators in those countries who will not allow anybody to think otherwise than the way they want us to think. We are a free country. They are slaves. Women in that part of the world, which you think is such a wonderful cultural example, are covered from head to foot, cannot vote, in some places cannot drive, cannot even get out of their houses. Now, you believe that that's a wonderful example of cultural diversity. I think it's obscene, an attack upon the basic rights of women, and I'm amazed to hear a young woman student defend that kind of enslavement of women across the world.
Jessica, you want to say anything?
Not even what I'm bringing up. Oh my gosh. I'm just saying that
yes,
the U.S. has a lot of preconceptions that we think that we know what is best for the rest of the world, which is not the case.
Is it cultural imperialism to believe that the enslavement of women is wrong?
I personally don't believe that it's the right thing to do, to go into another country and tell them what we think is right.
Let me ask you that question one more time. Do you think that the enslavement of women is cultural imperialism? I mean, do you think the opposing the enslavement of women is cultural imperialism, that we should be ambivalent about that?
No, personally I don't, but I don't think that the U.S. has the right to go
Why
in
don't you stand up for your own beliefs?
Let me go to another student on the other side, please. We're running out of time. Hold on, Mr. Hitchens. Please speak up. Tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Kendra from Colorado State University, and I had a question for the two men about the value of safety in the U.S. involving the war. I think it's really important, and if you question, some people question if we go to war, like it might threaten the U.S. safety, but we have to ask ourselves how safe are we now? So I think we should have the courage to stand up and do something about it.
Mr. Hitchens, value of safety.
I think it speaks for itself, but I'm still preoccupied with, I think, was it Jessica before?
Jessica, yes.
Actually, what Andrew says about the treatment of women, or the maltreatment of women, though it's formally correct, doesn't apply to Iraq, but would apply to Saudi Arabia. Of course, Saudi Arabia is our ally, and there, if you will, Jessica, is your problem, because the United States actually doesn't try and impose its own values on a lot of its allies. It doesn't. It's even willing to surrender them. It tried to let the Saudis tell American soldiers, who the Saudis had invited onto their soil, that they couldn't drive if they were female, or they couldn't wear a cross or a Star of David if they were Jewish or Christian, because non-Islamic religions are banned in Saudi Arabia.
We're running out of time.
As they're not. It's, in a way, the United States is often not judgmental enough. But what you're inviting me to say is, do I think our values are superior anyway? Well, I think the values of the Bill of Rights are superior to the values of a theocratic dictatorship. That doesn't mean they need be imposed, but it means they must be defended.
We're running out of time, and Andrew, there are 3 men students standing at the microphone, so we want to hear from all 3 of them before this is over. Give us your name.
Congratulations on getting up in time.
Go ahead.
Andrew finally gets a break.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Grant. I graduated from the University of Denver last year, and I had the privilege of being in the class with Doc Splain. I thank you guys for being here, and my comment is that I think regardless of what issue we're talking about, the most important thing is that we need to obtain accurate information, and I don't think that always happens in a textbook. Like many universities, I think my education was liberally biased at DU, but it was my responsibility to go out there and find other resources and to check the information. I've had the incredible privilege of traveling to Western Europe and also to Nepal, and from some of my real world experiences, you learn that there's so many different perspectives out there, and a lot of times I think as Americans we don't get all those. We have done some amazingly courageous things in our history. I don't agree with all of them, but I do believe in the freedom in America. And I think we have an incredible resource, the internet, to get accurate information. And I would just encourage all the students here today and also our viewers to do that. And
if you're a student feeling you're only getting one side of the story in college, you can log on to andrewsullivan.com and get a whole range of different views.
Thank you, Grant. He sounds like a budding Christopher Hitchens traveling around the world like that. Next student, please.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Mullen, and I go to Colorado State University. My question or actually a question that was posed to us last night was, do we feel as though we are the September 11th generation? And I think that's a premature title to put on our generation, being as though we're 20, 21, and maybe older. And if you guys think that that is an appropriate title for our generation in the light of many things to come.
Thanks, Kevin. One more. I think we have one more at the microphone. We're running out of time. Go ahead.
Hi, Mark from the University of Denver. I think a lot of the apprehension that some of us show in the war against Saddam Hussein is that it started out as a war against Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, and then kind of seemed to switch somewhere to a weapons problem. And it seems that President Bush has been using the impetus behind September 11th to push this war a little bit further and faster than most of us are comfortable with.
Thank you, Kevin, and I mean Mark, and everybody else out there, the students who participated, for getting up. Chancellor Ritchie for getting up real early and coming to us at 6 o'clock your time. Jim O'Brien, who runs the center there, and Doc Splain, who's on the scene. We have a little bit of time left to the two of you. The September 11th generation, is that fair?
Well, in a way, it could be a badge of honor to be called that, I suppose, but there is something a bit final about it. It's as if there would be anything else to talk about, either to celebrate or to deplore. I think I would want to resist it if I was his age. Anyway, since I think it's true to say that it changed everybody's life, and it certainly changed mine, I don't really think it's a generational question, to be honest with you.
I actually think it is.
Or if it is, then we're all of that generation.
No, because I think I think that all of us are very strongly affected by the first event that happens in our lives that really does change our attitude toward the world. It has a major impact. You can see the boomer generation is completely made by the Vietnam War and Watergate. I do think that this event, showing the fragility of American lives, showing that we're not invulnerable, will have a huge psychological impact on this generation. I think it'll make them more realistic about the world, more determined to do good things in the world, and more determined to defend the values that they believe in, all of which I think is a good thing. Now, let me just address the September 11th Iraq question. The issue is very simple in a way, it seems to me. What September 11th showed was that these people are capable of anything. They're prepared to kill people, innocent people, in large numbers. Now, we also know that what makes this particular era particularly dangerous is technology enabling these people to get access to things that could make a disaster like September 11th seem minor in comparison. I think we'll be lucky if we call the September 11th generation. There isn't another date that will live in greater infamy when these people get a hold of weapons of mass destruction. And the biggest and most dangerous supplier of such weapons of mass destruction surely has to be Saddam. That's the connection. Do you want September 11th with nukes again, or do you not? And can we wait for that to happen, or do we stop it now?
Christopher Hitchens, the UN, we're going to the Security Council, 15 members. China's in the president's seat for this month. Do you like the UN?
Do I like the UN?
Uh-huh. It's a good place?
Well, I like the idea of it. I wrote a very short book about it once, suggesting one or two ways in which it could be improved. But it's too vague a question, Brian, I'm afraid. I mean, yes, the UN is progress. It's an improvement over the League of Nations. It's an improvement over the war of all against all. It probably too much reflects the balance of power as it was in the Cold War.
I want to thank Andrew Sullivan, who you can find at andrewsullivan.com. Every day. It's constantly updated. He usually writes in the middle of the night. Do you live here? I notice you're in Provincetown.
I'm moving between living in Provincetown and here, half the year, half there.
And Christopher Hitchens, this book, again, we'll show them, is called Why Orwell Matters.
Thank you.
In your bookstores, $24, basic books.
Or through Andrew Sullivan's excellent website.
Are you going back again to anywhere other than the United States, but someplace in the world?
Well, having just come back from Qatar, what I'd really like to do is go back to northern Iraq, and I'm hoping to do that soon.
You're with the Kurds?
Yes, and see. There's also going to be a big meeting of the Iraqi and Kurdish opposition soon to plan for what. I keep saying this, but I'll end on it too. We know we're already in the post-Saddam era in Iraq. We're just on the threshold. If all this is going to happen anyway, whether we will it or not, the Saddam Hussein regime, doomed for a long time, has now doomed itself.
On your screen now is our American ambassador to the UN, John Negroponte, as he walks toward the hall where they're going to continue this debate. These are UN cameras that we're looking at. They are the only ones allowed in at this point. And we'll watch this debate and watch them assemble inside the...
True. to have flown to Baghdad and said to Saddam Hussein, look, you have one more chance. If you'll surrender, we will let you and your family live in our country. If you'll spare us all what's otherwise going to happen. But at that moment, the interview was at an end. I think Mr. Hussein is determined to fight it through to the last, but I think people will take him up on it.
Let me remind the audience that AndrewSullivan.com is up and active, and this morning, if you got on it, he tells you that he has no excuse for the way he looks this morning because he's been up late. Let me start with you.
I wasn't up late. I went to bed very early for me, but this is just a rat. It's like I feel like I'm not nowhere near in as bad a shape as these poor people in Colorado who are blinking in the middle of the night talking to us, for which I am immensely grateful. But no, it's hard for me to get up at this time of day.
A statement from both of you on this election.
Well, I mean, it took me by surprise, even though I've been spending the last 2 years telling people not to underestimate George Bush, and there I was underestimating him. This was a huge endorsement, I think, of his conduct of the war. That's what this is about. It's the most pressing issue facing us. And it's also a huge indictment of the Democrats' negativism, bitterness, anger, and inability to present a constructive or positive alternative. They had nothing really to say. They said, on the economy, we don't like your tax cut, but we're not going to reverse it, which is a completely incoherent position. And on the war, they kept saying, we're for the war, but everybody knew they didn't really mean it. And between someone with conviction and people who have no conviction, it's a pretty easy decision for people to make. And this is a lesson we've learned so many times before. And there's the notion Democrats were hoping to win by blaming the wealthy or blaming the rich or blaming Bush or blaming any number of people, this negativism that they engaged in. I think it started with Gore in 2000. It's continued. It's rancid. It doesn't work. They've got to start offering something constructive instead.
Christopher Hitchens, you notice that Andrew Sullivan's been in this country so long he's starting to lose his accent. How about you?
No, I have noticed that, and I've actually been meaning to speak to him about it. He's sort of slightly overdone the assimilationist posture. Nobody asked my predictions for the election, which I'm sorry about, because if I'd made them, I would have turned out to be right. I hope you're impressed to hear.
We'll accept that.
I thought, no, I could feel it coming, because by the simple experience of asking myself, suppose I was a registered Democrat, which I will admit I'm not, but suppose I was, and I know a lot of people who are, what single thing would get me to the polls? I couldn't think of one. I just couldn't imagine one trying my best to be lenient for them.
What do you think of George Bush?
And so that's a terrible thing to have to say for a political party. The second thing, by the way, I want to say, I noticed this yesterday, the New York Times, during its summary of the Senate race, it gave the percentages, races rather, it gave the percentages, the turnout, and then it also gave the money spent by each candidate. In no case was the Republican the big spender. The Democrats outspent in all the Republicans in each.
The Times also.
And I think that's new, by the way, the Terry McAuliffeization of the Democratic Party.
You didn't answer my question, though. What do you think of George Bush?
What do I think of George Bush? I think he is, I mustn't sound flippant about this, he's a very strong test of a very important proposition, which is that anyone can be president. In other words, he's probably the least qualified guy ever to have run for the office or even been considered for it. Everybody knows that he's not very well educated, not very well traveled, not very cultured, not very smart. But he's actually made a fair job of what ought to be, after all, a civil service position.
But first, let me just...
anyone ought to be able to do it.
Yale and Harvard are just reeling, having been told that being educated at Yale and Harvard means you're not very well educated. I mean, the truth is he was very well educated.
I don't mean to say he didn't attend good schools, but I mean, so did I, but I'm not well educated.
Well,
I went to a better university.
I would judge him on the basis of what he's done. It seems to me that the achievement that he should have lost in 2000 by a landslide, given the economic conditions, given the incumbent vice president. He should have lost every debate on those grounds. He won every single one of them. Any historical precedent would have shown him losing...
Al Gore.
Well, I know. Well, Al Gore is supposed to be very well educated, of course, a lot dimmer than Bush turned out to be. No, I think you're still underestimating him, which is fine by him. He loves the idea that people don't know.
We got to get the phones and we got to get the students involved, and they should know that both of these men were born in England, if you haven't figured it out by now. Both of them went to Oxford, although Andrew Sullivan also snuck into Harvard for a while. And you've both lived here in the country for how long?
It's nearly 20 years now.
Mr. Hitchens.
It's just 21 years.
You are a citizen, Andrew Sullivan?
I am not.
You are a citizen, Christopher Hitchens?
No, we both think we're cheating the country of its dues, actually.
Lexington, Kentucky, first up. Go ahead, please. What would you like to say?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to tell both these guys I'm huge fans of both of them. Read everything they write. Christopher Hitchens' weblog is killer. Hitchens is a great writer. As a libertarian Republican here in a red state, I'd like to ask both of them a quick question, two quick questions. One is, on economic policy, what are the one or two things they'd like to see Bush do? First, to get the economy going. Secondly, what do they think of one of our local heroes, Mitch McConnell?
Who would like to start? Mr. Sullivan?
I would like to see Bush broaden his tax cuts, not to remove the tax cuts at all. I think they should be made permanent, but I'd like to see them extended further down the income classes than they have been. I don't think it's good for conservatism simply to give tax breaks for the very wealthy. I think we need to give it to all people. We need to bring more people out of taxation altogether. I agree with him on the basic notion that we need to keep taxes low at this point, especially in a troubled economy. But I'd like to see him broaden his base in that way.
The last time there was a Republican midterm sweep, the Gingrich time, they made a promise which I'd really like to see them keep, which is that people who live in the District of Columbia don't have to pay the federal income tax.
That's because you live in the District
because
of Columbia.
Because we're not allowed to vote. Well, I do live in the District of Columbia, but I think I'm still waiting for that promise, that shining city on the hill.
Do you have any opinion of Mitch McConnell, who's going to be the number there?
Well, it's if we had a map, you'd see the Saudi coast of the Gulf, and you'd see a sort of peninsula, rather shaped like a palm, sticking out. It's a monarchy, but it's recently had a regime change. In fact, it's the only Arab country in the last 2 decades that has. They overthrew the old king, exiled him, and sued him for $3 billion in missing oil revenues. And then, though it's a Wahhabi Muslim state and society, they abolished censorship, gave women the right to vote, to run for office, and all the rest of it. And then, perhaps best known for this, they invited Al Jazeera, the Arabic satellite TV station, to come to operate from Qatar and broadcast from there without censorship. They had previously been trying to broadcast from Saudi Arabia, but the Saudis wouldn't let them do it. So there are now probably 35 million people who tune into Al Jazeera every day, and it's completely destroyed and undercut the state monopoly of broadcasting in the Middle East.
Andrew Sullivan, as you hear him talk about his trip over there, and we're showing a map of Qatar on the air this morning, and there's a UN vote in just a couple of hours. What do you think this country ought to do?
About what?
About the future of the Iraqi situation.
I think we should continue to do what we have been doing, which is put enormous pressure on this despotic and disgusting regime to actually cough up its weapons of mass destruction, and its nerve gas, and its botulism, and its anthrax, and its nuclear weapons, and its chemical weapons, or we will go in there and do it for them. And the question, I think, is entirely a function now of Bush's policy for the last 2 years of meaning what he says, as opposed to 8 years of the United States not meaning what it says. And the message is getting through, and I think the election has only intensified the pressure on Saddam, as I think a lot of people who voted meant it to do. So my fear right now is that Hans Blick sets down and muddles around like Mr. Magoo and doesn't get anywhere, and we lose the window of opportunity to actually get rid of this disgusting person and liberate the people of Iraq from the tyranny under which they labor.
We're going to go to the phones and talk to the students in just a moment. Our two guests, Andrew Sullivan and Christopher Hitchens, have done this before. Let's go next to the election. Your take on the just completed election.
Can I just finish on Qatar one thing?
What if I said no?
Then I would have to talk about the election.
No, go ahead.
Meekly. Well, the third great... you should hope you're waving my Vanity Fair piece, which has just come out about my report from this place. The third thing that Qataris have done is they've taken a side in the struggle that Andrew was just talking about. Having democratized themselves, they're interested in not living next to a vast despotic regime, and they've allowed the United States to build a 15,000-foot airbase on their soil without asking particularly what they want it for. And the foreign minister of Qatar has said recently, I don't know for sure this is true, but I've been reliably told it was.
And on my desk here is a picture of Albert Yates, who's president of the Colorado State University, here on the right. And on the left is Dan Ritchie, who has been involved with the University of Denver since 1983. He's a Harvard graduate himself, has an MBA, used to run Westinghouse Broadcasting, gave this school what amounts to almost $50 million in support, is the chancellor, works for nothing a year, is standing at a microphone at 6 o'clock in the morning at the Cable Center. Good morning, Chancellor Ritchie.
Good morning, Brian. It's still night, however, here in Denver.
You know, you have a program underway called Bridges to the Future, American History and Values in light of September the 11th. What are you trying to accomplish with this? We have a couple of Englishmen sitting here at our desk. We're going to ask them what American values are. What do you say American values are?
Well, what we're trying to accomplish is to make people think about the values, to understand why they're so important, and to look at how they may have changed since the beginning of the Republic, and whether that's a good thing, and looking forward, what should we be thinking about? What should we be? What should our values be? And that's what we're trying to accomplish. Do you want my views?
Well, I actually wanted to ask you, what is your favorite American value, and why is it an American value and not, say, a German value?
Oh, well, I would hope it would be a value everywhere. My favorite value is really integrity, and personal integrity and trustworthiness, because without that, nothing works. An organization doesn't work. A society doesn't work. History tells us that if it's everybody for him or herself, things don't work very well, and life isn't much fun.
Now, as you know, and you're quite free to say it, that you're in your 70s and you're still involved, active every day, running a university. Why are you working so hard at your age?
Because I'm in love with the place.
Why? What is it you like about it?
Well, it's an opportunity, I think, to serve, but to help young people really become all they can be, But, you know, the most difficult part of this, I think, is setting the right example all the time. You know, it's the best way to teach is to set that example. And that's what I'm committed to, and why I would get up this time of day and come and meet with our students.
Well, Chancellor Ritchie, thank you for getting up this early in the morning and coming in and joining us. We're going to turn to our guests here, and then we're going to come back to the students who are there in the room with you this morning. And you folks haven't been here with us for a while. Since we last talked, Christopher Hitchens, you've been in Qatar or in Qatar, depending on how you want to pronounce it.
You mingle the words Qatar and gutter.
Would you like to try
back
it?
of your throat, gutturally as well. Qatar is where I've been.
What did you find when you were number 2 leader for the Republicans in the Senate?
I don't know anything about him except that he was a tremendous foe of the campaign finance reform.
Let's go to Chicago, Illinois.
And that he looks like the sort of guy.
Chicago, and then we'll go out and ask our students to get involved. Chicago, you're on the air. Chicago, are you there? Chicago, Illinois, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Please speak up.
Why you have 2 imports analyzing American politics.
We do it all the time, but how about getting a comment in here or a question, and we'll go on with the program?
Well, if they notice that when the Civil Rights Bill was signed, majority of the people that's voting Republican were Democrats.
Yes, that's true.
That is probably true.
Lyndon Johnson is said to have said, as he signed the bill, made it an act, that was the end of the Democratic Party in the South for his generation, if not longer. And but it was a gamble, or if you like, no, what is it? What am I talking about? It's neither a risk nor a gamble. It was a price he was willing to pay.
Why are you 2 imports analyzing American politics?
Because it's a free country and we can. And because I think we both love this country and have come here and made it our own. And because the great thing about this country, I think, unlike any other country on earth, is that it will accept wastrels and like the 2 of us, yeah, with open arms, and as it has always welcomed immigrants forever. And whether we are
wretched refuse of the teeming shore, that's you and me.
That's you and I.
The sweepings. I mean, if there's an implied challenge from the question, which I'd be sad to think that there was, because it very seldom does come up, I suppose I could claim I'm the father of 3 Americans, which gives me some right to comment. And I do, in fact, pay the federal income tax, even though I
3 children.
don't live without them. Yeah.
Right.
And actually, I've said in print, after the main effect on September 11th on me was to make me decide that I shouldn't put off taking out citizenship papers, because I realized I had become an American, and that it was silly not to do it.
We got to go to Denver, and at the Cable Center in Denver, if you've just joined us, our students from Colorado State University and the University of Denver, and they're involved out there in a project that is Bridges to the Future. Let's ask our first student to give her name and school. I guess you're going to give your first name so we can watch the security problems. Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Bobby, and I'm from Colorado State University. And I'd like to pose a question to each of you gentlemen about media ethics and how they influence our society. Many of individuals accuse the media as giving all of our younger generation bad morals. However, is our media just giving us what reality is, or is it what we want to see, or is it a kind of chicken and the egg, which comes first kind of situation?
Thank you, Bobby. Andrew Sullivan.
I don't think that the media is destroying people's morals. I really don't. I think that the bottom line of most media in a free society, as opposed to a closed society, is that it wants to get viewers.